Hi everyone, and thanks for joining us on our webinar on all things GDPR. Today we're going to talk you over what exactly the GDPR is, so an overview of the key changes that the GDPR will bring. Gavin, who's our head of digital, will talk about the implications for digital media and how this is going to impact marketing teams. And Jamie, who is our head of development, will talk about how you can use technology to assist on the road to compliance and core changes that we're making to our platform to help you prepare for GDPR. So let's get started by discussing what exactly the GDPR is. So what's changing, why it matters, and what you will need to do. Just a disclaimer before we get stuck into it. So this is basically our interpretation of the key changes and how we think these may impact your business and what we're doing to kind of help you on the road to compliance. But it's not legally binding advice that you need to use in order to comply. We can recommend a legal firm if you do need some legal advice, and you can always rely on the ICO, and we'll give you a bit more information on different resources that you can use towards the end of the presentation. So in a nutshell, currently the Data Protection Act of 1998 controls how personal data is processed by organisations. It works alongside the PECR, or the Privacy and Electronic Communications Regulation. That gives people specific rights in relation to electronic communications, such as digital marketing. However, the rules aren't standard across the EU, and there are different rules in different countries. It's difficult to enforce the current laws as well, and there are loopholes which have led to personal data being misused. It's also been difficult to penalise those who have misused data, and those things combined with some of the factors have led to GDPR, which has been many years in the making. The GDPR, or General Data Protection Regulation, is essentially a new set of rules which will transform how companies handle personal data, all with the interests of the customer or data subject at heart. It'll standardise rules across the EU and impacts all EU citizens. This means even if your company is in the US, as an example, or anywhere outside of the EU, if you hold any personal data that belongs to EU citizens, you'll still have to process that in accordance with the GDPR. One misconception around GDPR is that it only relates to companies who carry out digital marketing or direct marketing, or that if you have less than 250 employees, GDPR won't apply to your business. Neither of those are the case, and GDPR will apply to any business who holds personally identifiable information. That could be on your customers, it could also be on your employees or other partners that you work with. One of the key things is that it's going to be easier to enforce the rules, and it'll also be easy to find those companies who are found to be non-compliant. And the ICO have already been handing out some fines, and that's before the GDPR has even come into force. So Money Supermarket were fined £80,000 by the ICO for ignoring opt-outs. Provident Finance were fined £80,000 as well for sending spam text messages. And TalkTalk were fined £100,000 for failing to look after its customer data properly. So it's key to take the changes seriously and make sure that you're preparing for them. The GDPR will come into play on May the 25th, 2018, so that only gives us 45 days until it's here. So now is a key time to start making sure that you've got plans in place and are getting ready for everything. Let's take a look at some of the terms that you might have heard or that might come up during our presentation and help you determine what exactly those mean if you haven't heard them before. Data controller, so this is any business or individual who owns data that can be used to identify another person. So your business is probably a data controller. Visualsoft is also a data controller of our own data. That leads us on to data processor. So this is basically any third parties that you use that also process the data that you have. So let's say that you are a data controller, so you've got your own marketing data, and you outsource your marketing to Visualsoft. Visualsoft are a data processor that you would use. Personal data, so this is anybody that can be identified via their data. Processing is basically how you use the data, so how you collect, store, manage, market to, analyse that data. Sensitive personal data, this could be anything like medical conditions, criminal convictions, etc. Subject access request, so this means that individuals can request to know all of the data that you hold on them. So that's one of the key things in the GDPR that we'll be talking about throughout the presentation. Impact assessment, this is basically where you need to identify and minimize risks of any new projects that you start to carry out. Privacy notice, so this is your privacy policy that you have on the site. You'll need to make sure that that's a lot clearer. You may need to update it to comply with GDPR, and we'll talk about that in more detail. And data subject, so this is basically any individual who your data could identify, so it's who the data is actually about. Let's look at the 6 key principles of the GDPR. The first is lawful, fair and transparent processing. Basically, you'll need to identify a legal basis to process any data you hold, so you have to process it in a lawful way. There are 6, but the most common and the ones which will most likely apply to your business are consent and legitimate interest, which Gavin will cover in his slides in a bit more detail. You also have to process that data for specified, explicit and legitimate purposes. This basically means you can only process the data in ways that you've specified and for a specific reason. So you should only collect data which you actually need, and you should only process it for the purpose of which it was actually collected. This leads us on to point 3. So the data must be adequate, relevant and limited to what's necessary. So as mentioned, collect only what's necessary and make sure that the way you use it is relevant to why you collected it in the first place. All of the data must be accurate and up to date. So data subjects have the right to request that you update any data held on them. You must make it easy for them to ensure it's accurate, and you must also take steps to make sure that the data is accurate as well. So for e-commerce teams, this might mean making it easy for customers to update their account details, like their address, phone number, and so on. For marketing subscribers, it could be easy to update their preferences, so choosing which channels they are happy for you to contact them on. The 5th point is identification of data subjects for no longer than is necessary. So this relates to how long you retain data. Under GDPR, you have to determine a retention period, and this is up to you, but it must be included in terms and conditions and privacy policies. So you basically have to say this is how long we want to hold the data, and then make sure that that's documented and that the data subjects know exactly how long the data is going to be held. And you also have to make sure that the way that you process the data ensures security. So you need to take appropriate measures to protect data, make sure that your processes are secure, make sure that any data processes that you contract are also GDPR compliant and will ensure the security. As mentioned, there will be fines for breaches, so this is really important. So 10 of the most important changes in GDPR and how these are going to impact you. Like I mentioned earlier, there are going to be increased enforcement powers. So there could be fines of up to 4% of a business's annual turnover or 20 million euros, whichever is higher. And I mentioned the fines earlier, which already have been handed down to companies to be found in breach of the current laws. So this is quite an important one for businesses to be aware of. There's also going to be joint liability for data processes. So make the time now to make sure that any third parties that you work with are compliant, make sure that you've got updated contracts with them, and make sure that they can guarantee their compliance as well. The third is privacy impact assessments. This is something that you would be required to carry out if you were implementing any processes that presented a high risk to data subjects. So this could be implementing a new technology within your business, such as like a new HR system. For more information on that, we would recommend that you sought legal advice or spoke to the ICO. The 4th is moving to a privacy by design approach. So this is going to be a challenge for a lot of companies, as it basically means that you need to incorporate data protection into like the heart of your business and across every department, and make sure that your teams are thinking data protection first and building that into processes, especially within marketing teams, but definitely across other teams as well. So this one's going to be kind of like a big culture shock for a lot of businesses, as it's not something that's often thought of at the moment. The 5th is you may need to appoint a data protection officer. So this is something that loads of clients have already asked us about. They've said, do we need to appoint a data protection officer? When does it apply to us? Basically, if you're a public authority, or if you carry out certain types of data processing activities, such as large-scale, regular, systematic monitoring of individuals, or if you process any special categories of data, such as criminal convictions, then you'll need to appoint a DPO. Your DPO, if you choose to appoint one, must report to your highest management level, and it can be somebody internal, so it could be a new role that you create. You could also appoint it to somebody alongside the role that you do at the moment, or it could be somebody external, such as like a legal company, for example. But there mustn't be any conflict of interest in what they currently do. So, for example, it couldn't be somebody who deals with processing data, as they would need to be unbiased. Visualsoft have decided not to appoint a DPO at this time. We aren't legally required to. Instead, we're putting together a compliance team to monitor our own compliance, and we'll review if this changes in the future. So that's just a bit of information for you, and you can read further information on appointing a data protection officer on the ICO's website. The sixth is subject access requests, as well as the right to be forgotten. So data subjects can now request that you provide them with any data you hold on them for free. So they could basically say, I want to know everything that you have about me, and what orders I've placed, what marketing lists I'm subscribed to. And then you would have to provide that to them in a certain time period, and also for free. They can also request that you delete any personally identifiable information that you do hold on them. So the seventh is super consent, or it's basically a change to the definition of consent under the GDPR. Consent must be freely given, specific, informed, and unambiguous. Consent for digital marketing must be freely given, so say goodbye to soft opt-in or pre-tick boxes for marketing purposes. And you also can't opt people in automatically who enter competitions, for example. Privacy notices must include the legal basis for processing data and the data retention period. So you may need to update your privacy policies to comply with GDPR. We're going to talk about what exactly your privacy notices should include in a bit more detail, and the ICO also have a ton of information on what you should include. The ninth is the abolition of the notification process. So the notification process under the Data Protection Act dictated that you had to complete an online form telling the ICO about any data processing activities that your business carried out, and there's no notification process under the GDPR. So it's kind of one less thing you would need to do, but you do need to keep detailed records of data protection activities depending on the size of your organisation. So you still need to kind of be keeping a log, and then you must be able to make these available to the ICO should they request it. And the 10th the 10th most important change is around breach reporting. So you must report any breaches to the appropriate supervisory authority within 72 hours of becoming aware of the breach. And if your breach presents a high risk of affecting any of the individual's rights and freedoms, that any of those people were in the data that was breached, you must inform those as well without undue delay. So you need to let them know that their data could have been compromised. If you're a processor of data, then you would also need to let the data controller know, and then they would be responsible for reporting the breach to the supervisory authority. So our advice would be to make sure you know how to spot a breach, make sure you know how to document them, and have a process where you can let your data subjects know should you need to. A breach could be, but it isn't limited to, data access by an unauthorized third party, information being sent to an incorrect recipient, devices that hold personal data such as mobiles or laptops being lost or stolen, or data being altered without permission. So now I'm going to hand you over to Gavin, who's our head of digital, and he's going to talk you through GDPR implications for digital media and marketing teams.
Okay, thanks for that, Lindsay. My name's Gavin, and I head up the digital marketing teams at Visualsoft. And today I wanted to discuss the implications for digital media when GDPR comes into force in May. So the first thing was, how will it actually impact digital marketers? So what do we need to think about? So I guess the first thing is how new data is collected. Secondly, how existing data is managed. So it's actually how we're collecting the data and how we manage it moving forward. But then where's it stored, and actually how is it processed? So to actually change the thinking about GDPR, because there's a lot of worries about it, don't just see this as a box ticking exercise. You could actually use this to build trust in your consumers. So GDPR is going to be a public talked about. It's going to be all over the news come May. So probably the best practice would be to actually tell your customers about it and educate your staff about it, and that will actually convince people that they do trust your brand, and you'll see increases in sales and increases in confidence from that. So the challenges marketing teams face, I guess the first one obviously is understanding GDPR and how this will work with the PECR. The second one, moving to a privacy by design approach, reviewing your current privacy policies and privacy notices. So privacy by design is built into GDPR. So you're going to have to review your current privacy policies and all your privacy notices to make sure that they actually are up to scratch and they cover the right stuff. Providing this new information to customers and your subscribers. So how do you go about this? What do you actually tell your subscribers, and how do you get in touch with them, or how do you provide and put this new information in front of them? And then making your privacy and consent statements compelling. So built into GDPR is no jargon, no tech talk. It's got to be compelling. They need to read it, but it can't be misleading, or it can't be non-understandable. So knowing what to do with your existing customer data and mailing lists. So we're going to go through that as well. And actually making the change and then maintaining good practice. So this isn't just about a one-time exercise. This is actually changing the way that you actually use data and how you collect it, and it's actually changing that moving forward. So this is always going to be there. So the first thing is consent versus legitimate interest. So it's clear, or it's really important from a digital marketing point of view to know the difference between consent and legitimate interest. So consent, offering individuals real choice and control. So it requires a positive opt-in. So there's no using pre-tick boxes anymore, or any other method of default consent. So when consent's required, you've got to be very clear, and they've got to be very clear on exactly what your customer is signing up for. Keep your consent requests separate from other terms and conditions. So consent can't be built in or hidden in terms and conditions, or in privacy policies or anything like that. It's got to be consent for there and then, and it's got to be easily understandable. The last thing on consent is when people consent, they're going to have to withdraw consent or be able to withdraw consent really easily. And you almost need to tell them how when they sign up. So on to legitimate interest, which is probably the greyest area. And this is legitimate interest depends on a company by company basis, or exactly what is going on, or what the situation actually is on the website. So basically, the easiest way to think about legitimate interest is, would that person expect to receive that communication? So for instance, if they've placed an order with you, then you would expect to get an order confirmation email, or maybe an SMS text message letting them know the delivery times. So that's fine. You can rely on legitimate interest for marketing activities if you can show how you use people's data is proportionate and has a minimal privacy impact. And people, again, would not be surprised or likely to object. So they're really the two main areas that we look at, or that we're looking at through digital marketing when we're reviewing GDPR. So creating effective privacy notices. Again, I've already touched on this a little bit, but they have to be concise, transparent, and easily accessible. So everyone needs to have access to your privacy notices. You can't charge for access or anything like that. But most important, it's got to be written in a clear and plain language. So it's got to be really understandable. Again, no tech jargon. Things to consider. There's a list here that might help you when you're actually thinking, or you've written one and you're checking it through. So what information is actually being collected? It's probably important that if you don't actually need that information, then why are you actually collecting it in the first place? So that could be bad practice. Who's collecting it? How is it collected? Why is it being collected? How it's going to be used. So that goes, again, if you don't need it, then don't bother collecting it. It's as simple as that. What will be the effect on this on the individuals concerned? So what kind of data is it? How high risk data is it? Is it just an email address, or actually is it an address with bank details, etc.? You know, if it's high risk, then you probably shouldn't be collecting it. Is it intended use likely to cause individuals to object or complain? And this goes again, if you read a privacy policy and you collect their data, are you using it in a way that they should expect it to be used? If the answer to that's no, then you probably should be either changing your privacy notice or not collecting that data. And then who's it going to be shared with? So you'll collect data naturally on a website that will probably be shared with third parties. So it's important in your privacy statement to explain third-party relationships. It's important to get the balance right, provide enough information for people to give with informed and specific consent, but avoid overloading them with too much information. So again, that goes back to, it's got to be compelling and it's got to be easy to read, even explaining the third-party relationships. So trying to explain different relationships between you and other parties can make your privacy policy overly confusing. So my advice here would be to keep it as short as possible, as sweet as possible, but also it's got to be to the point as well. If you give no information about your affiliates or the context of your relationship, it can cause distrust. So again, you've got to say what it does on the tin. You've got to say exactly where it's going to be used, how it's going to be used, who it's going to be given to. So most of the above could result in the user being put off. So it's important that you get the balance right when you're writing it. So how do we display that to clients or customers? So the easiest way would be, you could link to a page which shows the affiliate or third-party companies. This link could take users to a list of the affiliates. That's all very good if you only have a couple of affiliates or a couple of third parties that you use. So the link below in the example from Nike, obviously Nike use quite a few third parties or local entities. So they actually, in their privacy policy, they have a link to a list of their third parties. And that's probably the best way if you've got a lot of third parties. So the user can actually read it really quickly. It's concise, it's compelling. But then if they do want more information, they can easily get that more information. They can see the link. PayPal does this really well as well. So the other option is to layer the information. So you could layer the information in a pop-up to say, or an overlay to say this is the third party. These are the third parties we use. Again, you could have an OK button, or you could have a Learn More button. The Learn More button might take you through to your privacy policy, which then actually lists more examples of the third parties and exactly how your data is going to be used. So the option of how you actually display this information is up to you and what fits best with your website. Listing it's quite a good way as well. So you could simply list the other companies in your privacy notice, which I just touched on. But rather than actually listing them just where it's going to be sent, what you could do is you could pull their privacy policy and link to their terms and conditions, so that everybody's in a list, but actually the user, again, making it as easy as possible for the user, they could actually click through to the privacy policy and click through to the terms and conditions, which is a really nice example and a really easy way of displaying it. So GDPR and Google Analytics. So explicit consent isn't required for standard implementation of Google Analytics. So in Google Analytics terms and conditions, you're not allowed to actually collect any personable or personally identifiable information. The visitor's IP address, which is now recognized as personal data by GDPR, is used to determine their physical location, but the IP address itself is actually not stored. Stick to GA's terms. It's probably good to have a review of your Google Analytics. That's what we'd advise, so that you're making sure that you're not actually collecting any personal data. Along with analytics, it's probably implemented via Tag Manager. So Tag Manager, this would be a good, another good excuse to actually go through Tag Manager and remove any third-party tags that are no longer required, and make sure that you're not passing data to anywhere that you should be. So other data processes, it's important that you think of other data processes. So it might not just be who you think. So you might think of data processes as Google Analytics, a remarketing tool, your AdWords, any Facebook paid advertising, kind of things like that. But you've got other data processes as well. The simple ones would be PayPal and Amazon. So it's important that you list all the data processes in privacy policies and terms and conditions. Make sure you have updated contracts. So it's your responsibility to ensure that the contracts are updated and they're all GDPR compliant. Don't worry so much, because every company in the UK at the moment is in exactly the same boat. So they'll be coming to you for updated contracts as much as you're going to them asking for updated contracts. So it's not all bad, and it's not all too much hard work. So cookie policies. Cookies are mentioned only once in the general of the GDPR regulation. Natural persons may be associated with online identifiers, such as IP addresses, cookie identifiers, or other identifiers. This may leave traces in which, in particular, when combined with unique identifiers and other information received, may be used to create profiles and identify that person. So the GDPR take on cookie policies is you shouldn't be collecting data that you can combine with other data that will personally identify someone. So it's just again, it's a review of what cookies you're actually, what cookies you have on the website and where you're passing them to, or who they're served by, which it's probably covered by your third-party review that you've done with Tag Manager and your code on site when you're creating your privacy policy. So what does it all mean? So implied consent is no longer sufficient. Consent must be given through clear affirmative action, such as clicking an opt-in box. By using this site, you accept cookies. That message no longer works. You're going to need a pop-up to accept or reject. It must be easy to withdraw consent as it is to give it. So we discussed about when people consent to their email address, they need to be able to withdraw that consent. Sites will need to provide an opt-out option. So even after getting valid consent, sites must give people the option to change their mind. So it's almost opt-in and opt-out. So sending marketing emails. Sending non-personalized emails to all subscribers. All you need is their email address and their explicit, freely given consent. So non-personalized email to all subscribers, you would need a opt-in box. If you're sending personalized or data-driven email, you'd need the above, but you'd also need their consent to send a segmented or personalized email, unless you could use legitimate interest. So again, that refers back to the difference in between consent and legitimate interest. But you would need consent to send them in a marketing email, but then consent or legitimate interest to actually do a personalized email to them. So it's so the user understands why they're getting that email. So cart abandonment emails. If the user's already placed an order, then we would say that these are legitimate interests because they've already placed an order. This is following up on an order if they've purchased from you before. You should still include best practice, so an unsubscribe link, and you shouldn't add these emails to marketing lists without their consent. So just because you've sent them a cart abandonment email on legitimate interest doesn't mean that they've given you consent to add them to your normal marketing list. So reconfirming consent, and this is probably one of the biggest areas that we're facing in digital marketing at the moment. So if you're unsure that you have explicit consent, then really you require reconfirming that consent. And I'm sure that all of you have had a lot of emails at the moment with do you want to resubscribe, or do you want us to continue emailing me? Here's the benefits. So it's well worth putting an email plan together, if you haven't already, of how to get these people to reconfirm if you can't prove that they actually gave explicit consent to start with. There's a really good video on the Manchester United website, if any of you are interested, on, again, how to build trust. So this video on the Manchester United website, it goes through exactly what they've done and what the benefits are to the user. And it looks at first like a reconsent video, which it was designed to be, but however, it's actually better than that. And when after May, that they will still use it for benefits for signing up to their newsletter. And it's really worth a watch. So the biggest question, do I really have to delete old data? If you don't have explicit consent, you'll no longer legally be allowed to process that data for marketing purposes. The ICO are gearing up to hand down significant fines, which Lindsey mentioned earlier. That's why it's important you take steps now to collect consent for all your historic subscribers. So again, if you can't show that they had explicit consent, then you do need to reconfirm. So it's not all bad. Like I mentioned at the very start, if you equip your staff with the training and tools they need to get it right, you can demonstrate that data protection is not a box ticking exercise, but a commitment to people that you'll handle their personal data with care and respect. So it goes back to that trust. If you can use this and spin it round so that actually you're gaining trust amongst your customers, your business is actually going to do better from GDPR than it probably did before. Breaches won't just result in fines. So if you have a data breach or some complaints, you're going to lose reputation and you're going to lose trust from your customers. So GDPR plays an important part of that as well. Make sure you can demonstrate effective accountability arrangements, and the ICO will be fair. So if you do have a data breach, they're not looking to just fine you straight away. If you've actually tried to take precautions and you have tried to comply with GDPR. So if you've done your very best and then actually, you know, something has slipped through the net and the ICO, it needs to be reported to the ICO, they will be fair with you. It's the people that are not doing anything about it that they're gonna go hardest at. Explicitly consented data is much more engaged. So it's not really about your email list size. Think about the ROI. So if you've got 100,000 emails, you know, 20% of them are probably being opened at the moment. Hopefully this new consent or regaining consent is going to mean that actually you actually have probably 20 or 30,000 or 20 to 30% of your emails left over. Which means you can start looking into it a little bit more granular and doing more segmentation and actually increase the ROI. And then we'll help you. We'll help you meet the standards, but ultimately you must take accountability for your customer data and demonstrate you're looking after it. So it's all over to you as website owners to update your privacy policy, get your terms and conditions in place, you know, everything that's needed for GDPR and the marketing side of things. It's all over to you, but we can help where possible. So on that note, I am going to hand over to Jamie, who heads up our technical department. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Gav. Hi everyone, I'm Jamie. I'm the head of development here at Visualsoft. As part of the GDPR, my role has been looking at both compliance for Visualsoft as an organisation and also how to sort of help you guys with compliance using the platform itself. So what I'll do, I'll cover off the changes that we're going to make to the website first of all, and then I'll go through some process changes that you might encounter coming up to the GDPR deadline. So yeah, as a platform, we're rolling out some platform-wide changes which will aid you in your compliance. Again, these changes, they'll only aid with your compliance. Ultimately, you're accountable for your own compliance. it's your website, it's only one aspect of compliance. So you need to make sure that you review and create internal processes and policies for the management of your personal data and your customers' personal data, and then ensure that you're aware when there's been a breach of data, and again, you have process in place to report any breaches. So I'll start with the first change. So we have pre-tick checkboxes. They're gone. So we've already rolled this change out. So you should have noticed that if you had pre-tick checkboxes, they've now gone. If that hasn't happened, it just means that there's something bespoke on your website, and you can get in touch with support and we can remove that. But alongside that checkbox, you also now need to look at the wording that accompanies it. So where previously you may have had something along the lines of join your email newsletter, be informed of new stock, sales, offers, that sort of thing. Now you need to be a little bit more explicit about what it is that they're signing up for, lay your privacy policy information. So I'll show you that on the next slide. So this is the change here. So what you can do within your language string sections of your admin, which I'll cover that in a sec, you can actually update this whole content area to actually layer in your privacy policy, have that link in there, and be a bit more explicit about what it is that they're signing up for, what happens when they tick, and letting them know that they can unsubscribe at any time. So just quickly on language strings, you can access that from your admin panel. It's under the content drop-down menu and then down to language strings. Again, from in here, there are several areas that you can change. So I'll cover some more of those later on, but essentially any sort of language string that's on your website, if you're not familiar with this, you can change in here to be whatever it was to suit your brand. That's probably the key point on this, really. You don't need to make your terms and conditions and your privacy policy notices boring. They can be in line with your brand. So the next change is the subscriber data itself. We're storing more information now around your subscriber data. So we already have when they subscribe, so the registration timestamps on there. But now we're storing the actual page that they were on, the URL, when they actually subscribed, the IP that they were using at the time of subscribing. We now have the ability for you to select if they're going to subscribe via a specific channel. So where before we had one tick box for the newsletter, if you were also going to send them SMS or market material via post, the user needs to be able to actually consent to either or channel, so they can say, actually, I do want newsletter, but I don't want SMS. You can do this in your newsletter groups. You just set up a group and then make it a customer choice. This will change it on the front end of your website, and we actually store what they've chosen now via that. And probably the biggest thing here for GDPR is a referential copy of the terms and conditions and your privacy policy. So now at the point that somebody subscribes, we will take a copy of what your terms and conditions are and your privacy policies are at that point and store it against that subscriber. So if your terms or privacy notices change at any time, you can see exactly what it was that subscriber signed up to. There is a section in your CMS, in your content management, against the pages to say, actually, this is a terms and conditions page, this is a privacy policy page. It is called a GDPR page type when you're editing that page. It'd be good to check that over to make sure that that's now storing correctly. Unsubscribing, we're changing the way that customers unsubscribe. So currently, when a customer unsubscribes and clicks the link at the bottom of their email, it takes them to the website to ask them to confirm by clicking again. We're changing this process to be a one-click unsubscribe. So essentially, when they click that unsubscribe at the bottom of their email, they will be instantly unsubscribed with a notice saying, was this intentional? If not, click here to resubscribe. We are creating a customer preference center. So essentially, as Manchester United have done with their sort of video, if you've seen this, They've got a nice sort of marketing piece around resubscribing, and then everything links back to their preference center. So again, with our newsletter/preferences section on your website, a customer can sign in and update any of their customer information, or if they're not a customer, they could either subscribe or unsubscribe to your newsletter, and all the information that I've previously mentioned will be stored as well. You can change that URL as well if you want, just to keep it in line with, again, with your branding. So if you wanted, I think the Manchester United one was Stay United, if you wanted something along those lines, you can just put that in the support request and we'll get that changed for you. So changes on our side. So two-factor authentication is the start of this. So this is in your admin. You should already be au fait with this. Essentially, now we've added QR codes. So when you go in to change your password, there's a new tab which is two-factor QR code. And then you can use this with a two-factor authentication app such as Google Authenticator. Client authentication. So this is interaction with ourselves. So we're going to be rolling out a support passphrase. So essentially within the support system, each support user will have the opportunity to set their own passphrase. And then when you communicate with ourselves, if you're requesting a change or you're talking about sensitive information about yourselves or about us, then we'll require this support passphrase. We'll never ask it in full. We'll only ever ask for 3 characters from that passphrase. And it is unique to you, so don't share that with anyone else in your business. It is just for your communication with us directly. So just sort of cover off the main points, I guess, about the GDPR. Make sure you do yourself a data download audit so that you can monitor who's downloading your customer data and subscriber data, and then spot any breaches. Subject access requests. So you need the ability to search for a customer's email and then bring back all the data that you hold on that customer, including their consent. So we're going to be rolling out subject access requests early this month. Essentially, that will allow you to search for that customer via their email address, and it'll bring back everything that we hold in our system. And then the next bit, right to be forgotten, will be within the same piece of work where that customer can say, actually, I would like you to delete my information or certain pieces of information. So again, on that screen, you'll be able to delete, say they don't want their phone number anymore, you can delete just their phone number, or if they want everything removing, you can remove all of their personal information from the system. This won't remove orders and order history, but it will remove that customer's information from those orders. So you'll be able to still get your sales information, but it just won't be linked to a customer's address, name, etc. And then you need to start to think about your retention and deletion of data. So how long as a business do you need that information, and when is it safe to remove it? So again, later this month we'll be rolling out automated processes to say over X amount of days, months, years, start to delete information automatically. And obviously with the subject access requests, we'll also have the ability for you to do that manually. You need to think about the bigger picture as well. So what other systems do you use? What other processes are there in place? Look at your third parties, all the data that you hold in there, make sure that you've got the same process in place, especially for subject access requests. Can you get that information easily? Do you have a process in place to do it? This covers your CRM systems, offline data collection. So if you've got stores and customers are bringing in CVs to apply for jobs, they're just stored in a filing cabinet. External email service providers. So if you're not actually using our platform to send emails, make sure that you've got privacy policies for those external providers linked to in your privacy policy. And consider using third parties to help manage your own compliance. So we've got a partnership with Darren from Dynamic Path. We can put you in touch there, but it is a big job. So potentially don't look at doing it on your own if you need that little bit of guidance. There are companies out there to help you. So I'll pass back on to Lindsey just to cover off what's next.
Great, so thanks to Gavin and Jamie for their talks on the different areas. Hopefully you found that useful. So now we're just going to cover some kind of next steps that you might need to take as a business. So the first thing that we would recommend is kind of creating a cross-team department, as tackling something as massive as the GDPR isn't going to be achievable by one person. It's going to require involvement from all areas of your business, so HR, marketing, technology and so on. At Visualsoft, we had a team of around 11 representatives from different departments with myself as a project manager, and everyone's worked really hard together as a team to contribute and coordinate the changes. So it's not something that can just be done by one person. We'd also recommend carrying out an internal data audit. This should be the next thing that you do once you've put that project team together. It's so important to kind of map out your data to give you an understanding of where you actually collect data from, how it's used, who it's shared with, and what kind of data that you're collecting as well. It's a really crucial step to identifying where you have gaps, risks, where you don't have consent, where you need to identify legal basis, and where you need to revise processes and policies. And it can be a really eye-opening experience. So when we carried ours out a couple of months ago, there was a lot of information in there that maybe we hadn't all thought about. So definitely get started with that. Then actually make those changes to your privacy policies when you've identified different bases for processing data. If you do need a reconfirm consent, make sure you do this before May the 25th so you can kind of carry out those reconfirmation campaigns sooner rather than later, because by May 25th you should have already deleted securely any data you can no longer process, and you should have your privacy policy and definition of consent and so on in line with the GDPR's requirements. So different things to consider. This one might be how you collect and manage consent. As part of the GDPR, you will be required to prove it after May 25th if you are challenged. So just make sure that you're building this into your privacy policies. As Jamie will have mentioned, we're making it easy for you to track consent for any subscribers in the VS platform. But if you're using any other systems, then make sure that you can prove your record. Start thinking about the security of your data, what data processes you work with, and make sure that you've got updated contracts and so on with them. And it could be that you are a data processor for another company, and just make sure that you're treating that data securely. Look at your internal processes and so on. Subject access requests, make sure that you can cope with these. Make sure that you've got procedures in place with any data processes, just to make sure that you can deal with those in the adequate time. Define your data retention policy. Make sure that's built into your privacy policies. Make sure that you've got processes to either delete or anonymize data if you need to, and think about the right to be forgotten as well. So Jamie's talked about how we can assist you with your site, but you need to make sure that your own processes are compliant as well. So this could be educating internal teams. If you have stores, then educating the staff in the stores as well. It's something that every area of your business will need to think about. So reviewing consent, this is where that all-important data asset inventory will come into play. So make sure that you've got a register of all the data, you know when it was collected, you've got a registration time stamp, the URL and IP of any email addresses that are collected for online marketing, and also make sure that you can keep a copy of the privacy policies or terms and conditions that they signed up to at the time. So we would recommend a data asset inventory, which is like a digital template to record this information, and make sure that you are including all personal data as well. So this also would involve like your employee data as well as like your customer data and that kind of thing. So if you need help, obviously we've talked through like a lot of different things, and if you are just getting started with your GDPR project, it might be a bit overwhelming thinking about all of the different things that you have to do. The ICO has a ton of resources which are aimed at making compliance easier for you, including a checklist where you can answer a series of questions, and it'll help you identify where you need to focus and which bits actually apply to your business. So I would definitely recommend doing that if you haven't already. They've also got some other guides on the website, so 12 steps to take now, and their summary of what the GDPR means for businesses. You can also contact them on their helpline as well, so if you've got any questions, just give them a ring. They've also got like a live chat on their website, which is really useful, and we've definitely found that a good resource, and some of our clients have as well. You can also contact us if you've got any questions. So myself, Gavin and Jamie's contact details are on the screen. So if you do have any queries, feel free to contact us. But again, just to note that we can't give out any legal advice, so we can't kind of review your terms and conditions and check that they're compliant. We can give you our recommendations based on like what we found so far and that kind of thing. So that leads us on to if you do need legal advice, we have partnered with a business law firm, Endeavour Partnership. They have a self-audit tool which you can purchase for £350 plus VAT. This includes a data and asset inventory template, so we've talked about that quite a lot in the presentation, an ebook, a GDPR manual and a self-audit questionnaire. So if you do have any legal advice, you can contact them via gdpr@endeavour.law. Their email address is on the screen, or they've got a PDF which we've linked to if you need any more information. We've also partnered with Dynamic Path. They provide compliance software for marketing teams. Their product basically automatically scans your website and provides you with all of the dynamic paths where you collect data, helping you manage it. So it'll come up with all of the different points on the website where data is collected. It'll look at who that data is shared with, and it'll basically make it a lot more easy and identifiable for you to see where you need to update privacy policies and where your data is shared, that kind of thing. So for more information on this, you can contact their founder, Darren Hall. His email address is on the screen as well, hello@dynamicpath.io, or you can also speak to your Visualsoft account manager, who'll be able to give you more information. And that's it from us. Thanks for tuning in. Get in touch if you have any queries, and good luck with your own GDPR project.